One of the hardest decisions as a rent-to-renter is whether to focus on serviced accommodation or HMO. So on this video, I'm going to put them both to the test. I've got 5 measures, and at the end of this video, you're going to know which strategy is the best for you. I'm Simon, rent-to-rent specialist and mentor, and over the past 5 years, I've built a 7-figure rent-to-rent empire, and I do content like this for free to help you out, all right? And if that sounds good, make sure you hit the subscribe button for constant content, because there's over 300 videos just like this. So let's break down the 2 strategies quickly. HMO is all about acquiring a property and splitting it into rooms, all right? Now, if you split it into rooms and offer it fully furnished with all the bills, you can charge significantly more than you're paying the landlord. You pay the bills and the rest is your cash flow. Serviced accommodation is the same. Remember, we're not buying these properties right now. We're just borrowing them to generate massive cash flow to get you out of work, or to help you reinvest in assets you own, or to help you with your retirement, whatever it may be. So we rent to rent this property, and then we rent it on a nightly basis through things like Airbnb and Booking.com to create a massive income, pay the bills, the cleaning, the linen, and then what's left is your profit. So both really powerful strategies, but which one's best? So let's put them to the test. Test number 1, cash flow. Now, HMO is great for cash flow because you get the recurring, consistent cash flow. Once you've filled the property up with, say, 5 tenants, these guys are likely to stay there for a minimum of 6 months, if not more, which means if you're making £1,000 a month, that's every single month. So HMO can be really good if you're looking to replace your income, or you need a set amount of money each month to live on. Because if you're replacing, say, £2 a month, that's 2 HMOs, £1 a month, happy days. You can put your seatbelt on and take it from there. Now, serviced accommodation is not as consistent, but the cash flow is bigger. I describe it as lumps of cash. So I've got SA deals that are making me £2, £3, £4 a month. And that is very common, particularly if you're in a hotspot area. So serviced accommodation is great if you've got a bigger amount of income to replace. If you're sat there on a 6-figure salary, you're going to need 10 HMO, but you might only need 3 or 4 serviced accommodation, which means you can replace your income quicker. So who wins? It's got to be a tie. Do you want recurring income, or do you need big, quick cash flow? So cash flow, which strategy is the best? Well, I would have to say HMO. Why? Because I like the consistent recurring income. And in my past sort of job, it was very up and down, and that's what SA is, okay? There are peaks and troughs, there are peak season and off peak. So for me, HMO provides consistent cash flow. Well done. Now, test number 2 is management. Now, I remember when I started, I felt like the management for serviced accommodation was going to be way harder. You've got cleaning, linen, guests checking in and out, all these different platforms. And I felt like HMO, I just find tenants and sit back and relax for passive income. But it doesn't work like that. Let me just tell you now, it doesn't matter which one of these 2 you choose, it's not going to be passive until you replace yourself in the business, hire and scale. So for me, it depends on your particular goal, because either way, when you get started, it's just going to be you, right? So either way, it's not going to be passive. Now, one key difference in management for me is serviced accommodation is a little bit easier to systemize, and you have to go to the property less because it's all self-check-in, self-checkout, etc. HMO, on the other hand, you've got to go and physically conduct the viewings and meet the tenants. So if you are local to your deal, I recommend HMO is going to be easier to manage, because all you've got to do is nip round the corner to show somebody around, and that's that. If you are remote, or maybe you're really busy and haven't got time to do viewings, serviced accommodation could be the winner for you, because you're going to have to set up these systems anyway, and when you do, it's going to require less of your presence. Now remember, none of them are passive, and until you scale and replace your income, pretty much, it's much over muchness. So who takes the management? For me, it has to be SA. I just feel like because you're forced to systemize, you've got cleaners and housekeepers and automation and self-check-ins and everything's optimized, it requires less of my presence. Now, don't get me wrong, this is tough because you do have situation where there might be parties, bad guests, voids, maintenance issues, and you have to move them into hotels and all that. But I think at the beginning, it's easier to systemize SA and it require none of your presence than it is HMO. So it's currently a tie, 1-1. Test number 3, barriers to entry. In other words, which strategy is harder to get into? Now, look, there's 2 things to consider here. First things first, only certain properties are suitable for HMO, and therefore the amount of properties you can target are less. SA, on the other hand, you can have apartments, 1 beds, 2 beds, houses, all kinds of different manor houses, country houses. Hey, you can even have a caravan or camper van as an SA, right? You can do anything. So for me, I think SA is easier to acquire the properties by default. And then the second point here is compliance. So HMO is usually a larger investment because you've got more health and safety stuff you need to do. Whereas SA, there's a lot less to do health and safety wise, less barriers to entry. You know, you don't need all fire doors and smoke alarms in every single bedroom. So I never ever take this for granted, and legislation will continue to change. But at the time of this video, overall, I have to say that SA has lower barriers to entry. If you're finding this useful, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and whatever you do, don't go anywhere, because at the end of this video, I'm not only going to share with you the winner, but then I'm going to share with you my hack on how you can get the best of both worlds. Test number 4 is the risks. In other words, what could go wrong? So with SA, you could have a scenario where a guest books and you can't house them. There's a double booking. You know, maybe there's a maintenance issue mid-stay and you have to relocate them. Maybe there's a party and they damage the property and you're left with a completely trash property that you have to fund the repairs on. There's all these different potential SA risks. However, the good thing about SA is you get paid up front. But HMO is not without its risks. You know, what happens if a tenant gets into arrears and you have to offset that by continuing to guarantee the landlord's rent? I've had a tenant sign a year's agreement and get 5-6 grand in debt, and I've had to offset that. It's completely destroyed all my cash flow. I've had scenarios, for example, where tenants have been bickering and having disputes in the house and constantly in my ear. Really annoying. And I've also had situations where for whatever reason, tenants just don't look after the house because they're in there so long that they can do more damage than an SA guest can probably do in a few nights. So in terms of risk, which one's the greatest? I would have to say it's better the devil you know, and therefore HMO has less risks. All right, it's way less risky because you've got long-term tenants, you know exactly who's there, you build a relationship with them, the cash flow is consistent, and you're less likely to have the unforeseen risks that you will with SA. Last but not least, scalability. Which strategy is more scalable? Well, SA is scalable because so many different properties work for SA. The issue you've got, and I've had this issue in my area, is that when I started, there was no SAs. Now, as I've got 10, 20, 30, I oversaturate my own area, which means I then have to move out of area, which then creates different barriers and different challenges. HMO, on the other hand, once a house is full, you can scale to the next and the next and the next. And to be honest with you, there's just way more people in most areas looking for long-term accommodation than there are short-term accommodation. And with the ever-increasing cost of living, I personally feel like it's way easier to sell a room with all bills included and just box it off. You've got students, professionals, all different types of people looking for rooms, and therefore I would have to say HMO is the most scalable. So what do I do? Well, over the past 5 years, I've explored both, and I realized that actually the holy grail is having HMO for recurring, consistent, reliable income, and SA for big lumps of cash. And therefore I invented Rent-to-Rent 2.0, which is a hybrid of both. A couple key things to remember here. The first thing is never do HMO and SA in the same house at the same time, because nobody wants to, you know, be living in a property for a year and then having somebody else SA a room every single weekend causing issues. So keep them separate. You can, however, operate a property as a HMO and then operate a property as an SA, depending on the licensing and the property in your area. The second hard lesson I learned was don't do what I did, because I did a couple of SA, a couple of HMO, and then I ended up having 2 businesses. Focus on one, scale it up until things start to slow down, replace yourself so that somebody's running it, and then move on to the next. And if you do that, you can actually maximize your area before moving on to the next and scaling. I hope you found this useful. Let me know in the comments which one you prefer, HMO or SA, and I'll see you in the next video.